Very good. Well, I just want to thank everyone again for coming out today. If you are new to, well, actually, can I see a show of hands? Don't be surprised if there is a minority in the room. We kind of packed the room with Friends of FIDO today. But if this is your first time coming to a FIDO Alliance event, would you raise your hand? Oh, excellent. Over half the room. So fantastic. So I'm going to keep that in mind with everything I say, not to presume too much prior knowledge about FIDO. And very happy to be here in Canada. This is our annual, this is day one of a full week for us. The FIDO Alliance is a trade association, and we have member meetings. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll be having member meetings. We also try to do some awareness and training and education programming wherever we visit. So this is our chance to do that here today on the Monday. So welcome. If you're going to be with us all week, that's fantastic. If you're just here today to kind of catch up on where things are, we'll try to make sure that by the end of today, all your questions have been answered. So I'm going to cover kind of the big picture around FIDO, why FIDO, also progress, taking you through the end of 2016. So why FIDO? In 2012, a very small number of companies got together, 6 companies actually, and formed the FIDO Alliance and incorporated this organization to take on a very ambitious mission to solve the world's password problem. The password problem, I want to deconstruct that a little bit, not be too quip about that. What we mean is password is an authentication credential that has several inherent properties that you just can't get away from. These properties make it vulnerable to attack, which is why we have so much exploitation of that vulnerability. It's inexpensive to attack. So we have a fraud problem, a data breach problem. We also have a usability problem. Passwords are hard to remember. If people give themselves the leeway of reusing passwords to make their personal lives a little bit easier, they're making not only themselves, but everyone else in the ecosystem more vulnerable to exploit, because you can steal that one password and compromise several accounts. So because of these usability problems and the security problems and the rise of data breaches, going back 4 years ago, data breaches were already a big problem. But data breaches have become a bigger problem each and every year since then. In 2016, just in the US, we finally broke the 1,000 data breach mark. So over 1,000 data breaches last year for the first time. Every year we have more data breaches. And every study that looks closely at why these data breaches occur comes back with by far the most exploited vulnerability is the password. Even things like distributed denial of service attacks, like recently took down a lot of the internet use on the East Coast in the US. That was actually exploiting essentially the password system, default username and passwords configured on IoT devices. So basically, we have to answer this problem. We need to invent and distribute and bake into the infrastructure of the internet a fundamentally new and different authentication scheme, because you can't just keep adding on to the password problem. If you add on more security, then you're just making that usability problem worse. So the only thing we saw as a way out of this downward spiral is to come up with something that was designed with a fresh set of eyes on the problem to make sure it did not share the fundamental vulnerabilities that passwords had on the security side, and it also did not share the usability challenges of passwords. It wasn't going to be based on trying to remember things. It wasn't going to be based on what we call a shared secret, where you have to give your credential away in order to use it. And we came up with FIDO. So as I mentioned, Fast Identity Online, or FIDO, Alliance is a trade association. Any organization can join. We have members from around the world. In fact, very evenly distributed membership between North America and Asia, with also a strong representation from Europe and other locations. Our names might suggest that we are tackling all aspects of identity because we use the word identity. So this is where I take the opportunity to clarify our scope is very narrow. We are only focused on the authentication credential problem, the password problem, and the one-time passcode problem. So the mission, just to state it clearly, is to define an open and scalable, interoperable set of mechanisms that supplant reliance on passwords to authenticate users to online services. Now, we go about that mission in 3 simple steps. We develop technical specifications so that if implemented, that those independent implementations will interoperate without any out-of-band coordination. So that's the important promise of those specifications. Operate industry programs to ensure the successful adoption of those specifications, to make sure products are actually building FIDO authentication into their devices, that services are building the server-side capability to take advantage of those devices, and then pursue formal standardization. Basically ensure that this new technology finds its way into the absolute fabric of the internet. We are led by this group of companies, and we have some new companies just in the past few months. Fingerprint Cards and Gemalto, our most recent board member companies. What I like to point out by covering the leadership of the FIDO Alliance is that it's balanced. Not only do we have market leaders in their respective industries, such as ING and Bank of America and USAA on the banking side, Intel, Qualcomm, Microsoft and Google, on the technology provider side. Enterprise security companies, authentication companies, RSA, Vasco, and innovative startup companies that have really led the way in this market, like Knock Knock Labs and Yubico, and so many other companies that you see represented here. But what I want to point out is that we have balance. We have device manufacturers, both in mobile, companies like Samsung, and PC, companies like Lenovo. We also have leading service providers, the complete supply chain. If you want to have a very secure root of trust for authentication, then you want to plant that root of trust deep in a device where it is not vulnerable to malware, and you want to design a protocol that doesn't require the user to give away their secret in order to authenticate. And that's what we've achieved with FIDO, and we've gotten there by ensuring that from the beginning we had good balance on the supply side and the demand side of this marketplace at the helm with the board. Now, FIDO standards at the end of the day can be summarized very simply as providing online authentication using public key cryptography. Now, we'll talk to you about some different specifications we have, some different use cases that we support. What all FIDO authentication technology has in common, regardless of the spec or the version, is that they're using public key cryptography, asymmetric, where there's a private key and a public key. And I'll walk through that with you. Plus, there's a detailed session on technology, a few of them actually later today. So you might be surprised to not see the word biometric on this slide. I know that many people that I've talked to have come to me say, oh, FIDO, that biometric standard. So I just want to clarify, you see FIDO associated with biometrics so often because biometrics are a way of doing user verification that's very easy. FIDO standards create a layer of abstraction for how to do user verification. If you really wanted to, you could still use passwords local to your device for user verification. But biometrics have such good usability that we're seeing biometrics often being brought up in the same conversation as FIDO. But the FIDO standards allow you to use anything you want for user verification, and the FIDO standards are really public key cryptography that define how the device talks to the online server. So let's compare and contrast what FIDO does compared to the password model and the one-time passcode model that we really set our sights on supplanting. So here is how shared secrets work. So this is both password and one-time passcodes are shared secrets, which means the user has to know the secret and the server has to know the secret. The server has to have something stored that it can compare server side against the evidence that they're talking to the correct user, and that evidence has to be provided by the user and transmitted over the internet to the server. So that's a shared secret. So obviously that means any shared secret credential is one that you could be socially engineered for. If I have to give you the secret to log in, then maybe I give my password, I give my secret to the wrong site, right? Phishing attacks, spoofed websites, old story, but still very effective at compromising these secrets. And surprisingly, even one-time passcodes are being compromised in the same way now. So sophisticated, more real-time attacks that are actually intercepting that one-time passcode through socially engineering the user and then getting into your account real-time before that one-time passcode expires. So this is what FIDO needed to design away from. And the simplest diagram I could show is this. We added something called the FIDO Authenticator to this picture. So now the credential, you can see it as two steps. Step one, local on the device and not over the internet. This is where the user presents their evidence that they're the correct user, what we call user verification. So this is where you give maybe a fingerprint to your phone, look at a camera on your computer or tablet, or type in a code that is local to your device and not shared over the internet. This is the authenticator doing user verification. Once the user is verified by the authenticator, which lives on your personal device, the authenticator then, your personal device, is what's authenticating you to the online service, not using that same evidence, not sharing your secret or your evidence of who you are, but actually using public key cryptography. And what's beautiful about public key cryptography is you don't have to give away your private key. With asymmetric cryptography, you just use your private key to sign a challenge. So you give proof of possession that you have the private key. The online server verifies that you're the right user because they have the public key that's associated with that credential. So in this simple change of architecture, we've completely turned the model upside down. Now let's talk about the different use cases that we support. There's the passwordless experience, where after you enroll your FIDO credentials with your service, after you've registered your personal device with your favorite website or app, now you no longer have to use a password. That it plays no part in your authentication. The FIDO Authenticator is being asked to do two jobs: user verification, make sure I'm taking evidence that's the same user, and signing challenges cryptographically for you. The other use case we have is a second factor, where you're just using FIDO for the second factor. Your first factor of authentication is still your password, but because you are binding it to a FIDO authenticator, you're no longer relying on that password for very much security, and so you could maybe cut back to a 4-digit PIN or something like that. You're really just collecting that password to identify the right account, and then you're really relying on the security of the second factor for authentication. So this is coming in a lot of different form factors, but such as small devices called security keys that would go into the side of your computer and now can be used wirelessly to talk to any device that supports Bluetooth or NFC. Now, I've talked about FIDO's security and the usability benefits of FIDO, and now I want to talk about kind of the business terms, return on investment of using FIDO as your model. There are other ways to deliver what the user would see as a similar user experience without using FIDO. What FIDO gives you is interoperability. It gives you this whole ecosystem of devices that already talk to different servers and vice versa. So what that means in hard dollars and cents is that instead of integrating with a different vendor every time you want to offer a new user experience to your end user, you now can just do one integration, FIDO enable your infrastructure, and you can interoperate with anyone's client-side solution, whether it's a different form factor or a different maybe biometric modality, and you're off to the races. So that standards always help drive costs in the benefit of the enterprise. The other thing you get is you are able to interoperate with any device you want to, but you're not required to interoperate with any device. FIDO offers something that you'll hear more about later today called the metadata service and device attestation, which means as an online service, which we call a relying party because you're relying on the FIDO authenticator, you get to make informed decisions about the level of risk or the security properties that you require in that FIDO device. And you could just decline to register an authenticator that doesn't meet your requirements. So we have you in mind when we designed this protocol. And so no more one-off integrations. You get full interoperability and the ability to make informed decisions about what authenticators to trust and what not to. So in addition to the usability, security, and ROI, FIDO also addresses privacy, which has become a bigger part of the biometric authentication conversation recently. So here's the thing to keep in mind about FIDO. There's no third party in the protocol, so this is not identity federation. You know, if you've attended other conferences about identity management, most of the industry standards around identity management are tied one way or another to federated or shared identity. FIDO fits perfectly into those federated models. It does not duplicate that model. FIDO is only trying to replace the password, not your federation protocols. So the identity provider in a federation would be the FIDO-enabled service. So there's no third party. It's direct to the identity provider. And there's no secrets living on the server, as I mentioned before. So now that server is no longer a database full of credentials that are attractive to be breached, because if someone did walk away with a database full of FIDO credentials, there's nothing they can do with them. They're just public keys that cannot be reused. Biometric data, if the authenticator uses biometric for user verification, a FIDO requirement is that that biometric template never leaves the device. And this is fundamentally different from kind of traditional biometrics, which were all match on server. FIDO is not the only solution doing match on device. Obviously, Touch ID from Apple works the same way. So this is kind of an emerging consumer electronics approach, kind of emerging consensus around how consumer electronics are going to do this. And it's a requirement of FIDO. And there's also no unique identifier being shared from the device. So you could imagine when we were sitting around the table putting this protocol together that, and you'd be right to imagine it, that there was a debate around whether or not we should have a global unique identifier in every one of these devices. If you had a global unique identifier in the device, then that could probably help you fight fraud, because you'd always know every time if this device had attempted to register an account with you before. But you also would have a way of tracking this user's behavior around the internet. So in the end, we decided to be privacy by design and to not have any information being shared from that FIDO authenticator that could be used for correlation or tracking. So there's no account linking or device linking capability added by FIDO. There's the old ways, using cookies and device fingerprinting that people have, and they can still try to identify you that way. FIDO gives nothing new to be used as a correlation handle. So in summary, FIDO authentication delivers better security in the interest of online services, reduced cost, the interest of any enterprise deploying this solution, and it's simpler and safer for users. So that's sort of the FIDO 101 that I'll cover. And again, there's a lot more to know about how the technology works, and you'll hear about that in other sessions today. Now let me catch you up on some of our progress, taking you through where we've come from 2012 through the end of last year. We formed the organization in 2012, as I mentioned. We launched it to the public for the first time and opened it for other members to join in February of 2013. So we're almost there in 2017. So almost 4 years ago, we launched this organization with 6 organizations. And we now have over 250 organizations from around the world. We first developed something called FIDO Ready. So if you've heard that, I want to demystify that for you. FIDO Ready was a branding program we offered before we had any finished standards. We did this when we just had working drafts of FIDO standards. This is actually something other standards bodies have done. Wi-Fi is kind of famous for it. So that people could put solutions in the market based on FIDO technology, even though it wasn't officially done. So it means that you've gone through some interoperability testing. We've since deprecated that program because, as you can see on this timeline, we finished FIDO 1.0 at the end of 2014, and now we run something called FIDO Certified. The certification program has more rigor. There's a formal conformance test in addition to interoperability, and we only test finished documents, as we call implementation drafts, are really ready for market finished specifications. We added some more transports in 2015 to our second factor solution. So it started off only with USB. We added Bluetooth and NFC to make it truly universal across all host devices. And then 1 year ago, just under 1 year ago, we formally launched a partnership with the W3C to ensure formal standardization of FIDO for the web. So FIDO authentication is now actively and is almost complete. The W3C process is almost complete, where they will publish their own authentication specification based on FIDO authentication for web browsers. And this will make FIDO the flavor of authentication, the standard for strong authentication for the entire web platform, all web browsers, all web applications. What we believe will happen soon thereafter is by having the web platform define this capability, that we'll see operating systems follow suit and offer that same capability for native applications running on their OS. So this is an effort that will bring FIDO through formal standardization to all devices. And then most recently, just last month, we published the first update to FIDO 1.0, FIDO 1.1, both UAF and U2F specifications. And I'll briefly summarize some of those capabilities. So on the UAF side, we added some more attestation format support, and you'll hear more about how that fits in the technical talk. We also added support for smart cards as authentication factors. And we expanded the metadata capabilities based on some early deployment experience, or some of the highlights in what we've added to UAF. On the U2F side, we updated the transports to be compliant with all of the new standards with NFC and Bluetooth and USB, but also we made sure that the metadata service could work with U2F tokens. Before this, only UAF authenticators were taking advantage of the FIDO metadata service, and now FIDO metadata service has universal support across all authenticators and devices. So now let's talk about who's using this technology. What products are implementing the technology, what services are actually deployed and relying on FIDO authentication every day. So first, certification, and you're going to hear more about certification later today in detail. So I'll just say that the certification has grown much faster than even advocates of the technology like myself thought it would. We already have over 300 independently certified products in the market. Now, these are devices, end servers, second factor tokens, as well as smartphones and even PCs from leading companies. So here are all the companies. So it's not like 300 products from 4 companies. These are all the companies that have FIDO certified devices from around the world. Some of the biggest names in consumer electronics, and even some names that you're surprised to see go through a certification program, like eBay and Bank of America and Google. Well, those companies have a commitment to true interoperability, and so they've taken advantage of the program to make sure that their own implementations fully interoperate and comply with the standard. These are the companies that most recently were certified. So we have certification events every few months, and we recently had one in December. And one of the things that came out of that was Intel's platform. So Intel has a new capability that they're putting into their chipset. Is tied to their technology called SGX, which means if you are a device manufacturer like Lenovo or any other PC manufacturer taking advantage of those components, it's much easier now for you to build a FIDO compliant, such as in Lenovo's case, it's a fingerprint sensor that's FIDO compliant on all their new PCs. This is something that Qualcomm did about a year ago for the Android ecosystem, which is how we got to so many Android FIDO certified smartphones from these manufacturers. Fujitsu, Samsung, Sony, Huawei, and Lenovo's brands, LG, Sharp. So we have tremendous support already in the marketplace, hundreds of millions of devices that can already do FIDO, both single factor and multi-factor authentication. This is a capability that anyone in this room could come back and say, let's turn this thing on, let's start let's start a proof of concept. Let's start playing with this because there are enough devices out there that our customers already have that we could authenticate with much more securely and give them a much better user experience. Now, not to be left out, let's talk about the Apple ecosystem. So Apple is not FIDO certified. Apple's not implementing the FIDO protocols, at least they haven't yet. But Apple has opened the APIs for Touch ID, and because of that, there's a third-party market of people FIDO enabling the iPhones and iPads. So anything with a Touch ID sensor can now be FIDO enabled, has been FIDO enabled through third-party SDK providers, such as Knock Knock, who you can find out more from here on the break. And these are 3 services that are taking advantage of that fact. They have actually added FIDO authentication on top of the Touch ID APIs because of the value they see, the additional value they have in using FIDO authentication across all devices and some of the additional properties and security properties you get from deploying FIDO. So Bank of America, Entity Docomo, and eBay are all live today on iOS devices. And now a little bit more about the other platforms. Windows, Microsoft has announced that they will be making Windows 10 and their server-side capabilities that match that, as well as their Hello application, FIDO compliant, once the formal standardization effort in the W3C is concluded. And that effort is coming to conclusion soon. Intel, I already mentioned what they have been doing. That's with FIDO UAF, and Lenovo with the new Yoga 910 being the first PC that has FIDO capabilities built in. And on the web side, we see that Google's Chrome, which has been FIDO U2F compliant for several years already, that the Chrome team is very actively involved in the W3C effort on the new specifications coming out of W3C, as well as Mozilla's Firefox and Microsoft through their Edge browser team. And many more companies. So we talked about who is building products, who is putting the capability out there, but you haven't really talked about FIDO in the market until you talked about who's taking advantage of those capabilities. These are the companies that are already live and relying on FIDO devices. These are companies that just need better authentication for their consumers, and they're taking advantage of FIDO. So company we've already talked about, Google, PayPal, Bank of America. PayPal is actually the first deployer of FIDO, but also Dropbox. Entity Docomo has FIDO at the center of their entire very well-known identity ecosystem for mobile commerce. BC Card is out of Korea. You might not know them, but they are the leading payment card brand, payment service brand in Korea. Now they're using FIDO, and they're actually using FIDO on top of Samsung Pay in Korea. Dashlane, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but that's a traditional password management solution that has now added FIDO capabilities. So basically the writing is on the wall. FIDO authentication is emerging as the global standard to replace passwords. Even password management companies are implementing support for FIDO at this stage of the game. And other companies from China and around the world, Salesforce is a good one here to call out. The UK government. So the first speaker today talked about what's happening with government identity in Canada. Well, in the United Kingdom, they have a similar solution, and the UK Gov Verify solution has a FIDO compliant identity provider that they have approved. And what that means is that establishes FIDO as an acceptable, strong authentication mechanism for accessing UK government applications. And until Brexit is complete, it also means, because of their treaties with the European Union, that there is this program across all of Europe called EIDAS. And it means that FIDO is now a recognized strong authentication capability across all of Europe. So hopefully other governments will pick up and follow UK's lead and actually integrate that opportunity. Now, speaking of Canada and what's happening in identity, there's a lot more I could cover about FIDO, but I want to get to the future. One of the programs that I didn't really focus on, but I will just to highlight our new partnership with DIAC, is that we have a liaison industry partnership program with over a dozen different trade associations that we have signed some kind of memorandum of understanding with to collaborate to promote FIDO to their industry and to listen to their industry and bring requirements and recommendations back into FIDO's development, FIDO's certification program, and FIDO messaging. And DIAC is our newest liaison partner, so I'm very happy about that and happy they're here today helping arrange this meeting in Canada. And I look forward to collaborating with the Canadian government as we have already with governments in Europe and Asia and the US. Let's talk about the future. What's next for FIDO? 4 big themes that I want to talk about. First, W3C and web authentication. So I've already kind of teed this up for you, but just to bring it home, when this is published as a recommended standard by the W3C, that is a good indication that web browsers are going to pick that up. A better indication is that several of the leading web browsers are already involved in the working group and doing proof of concepts and interoperability testing. So we do expect within 2017 to see major web browsers become fully FIDO compliant by implementing the new authentication specifications of W3C, thus bringing FIDO authentication support to all web browsers and the entire web platform. That means that if you are sitting in this room and you run a web application, then 2017 is your year. If you haven't already FIDO enabled your web application, now's the time because the browser will be able to support that very soon. Next big theme, we have a new standards effort with EMVCo. When you use a payment card at a terminal, and the new chips that you see, or maybe not so new for some of you, whether you're tapping it or sliding it into a reader, that chip is compliant to standards that have been set by EMVCo. They are the payment industry standard setting body around payment cards. And they've actually broadened their scope. They also set the standards for 3D Secure, which is basically payment card use on the web. If you may have noticed that all of the major payment companies in the world are already on the board of directors of the FIDO Alliance, right? So Visa and MasterCard, American Express, and others. And that's not by mistake. The payment industry is very interested in the technology we're developing, and now we have a formal partnership with their standard setting body to look at something that they require to recognize a mobile phone, a mobile device, could be a wearable, doesn't have to be a phone, but a consumer device, and that's their term, consumer device, as the host for the payment credential. So they have card verification requirements. So CVM, card verification method. So when you use maybe the 3 digits on the back of your card to prove that you're a real card holder, that's CVM at play. So card verification, card holder verification method. Is the right card holder, did someone steal this payment credential, or is the correct card holder present? The CVM standards have a lot to do with whether it's a card holder present transaction or a not present transaction, card holder not present, which has implications in the entire e-commerce world because usually the rates that you pay, because the fraud is considered more at risk, is different. Now, to address this, EMVCo has already written requirements for CD-CVM, Consumer Device Card Holder Verification Method. CD-CVM is something that they hope will be fulfilled by solutions in the market so that the mobile device, the wearable or the mobile phone, can truly prove to the payment network that the correct card holder is present. You might be surprised to hear that when you use things today with your mobile phone and you make payments at point of sale, oftentimes that is being treated as a card holder not present because the payment industry doesn't yet have a universal mechanism for recognizing and kind of giving the merchant credit that the card holder has just proven that they're present the way they do in traditional card transactions. So this is like a really big deal for the payments industry. So they're working with us because the way FIDO authenticators are being standardized and FIDO authenticators are showing up in all of these consumer devices, why not leverage that authenticator capability to also provide CD-CVM for the payments industry? So that's what we're working with them on, so that we can be a viable option for fulfilling CD-CVM, and with more and more ubiquity, likely the main way that that industry fulfills CD-CVM is through FIDO Authenticator compliance, and that's our objective. Along the way, they also had more requirements. There's something that they wanted that the FIDO standards did not have. This is a good reason for us to collaborate with other trade associations. And they would like to make sure that your mobile device, your consumer device, doesn't prompt you to re-authenticate when you're trying to buy something if you've just authenticated for some other reason. So we have heard their requirements, and we have a team working on a solution to that requirement. We call that UVC, User Verification Caching. So this is going to be an extension that we produce. So it'll be an optional feature that you can implement or not implement that will work with the new FIDO specifications coming out of W3C. So between the fact that we're having growing ubiquity of FIDO authenticators in consumer devices and this new capability that we know delivers something that the payment industry wants, we believe that very soon you'll start seeing FIDO-compliant payment applications fulfilling CD-CVM, proving that the cardholder is truly present, as a new kind of industry best practice. So that's a major theme that we're working on. Other theme, client to authenticator protocol. This is a new use case. I talked about 2 use cases where we have passwordless experience, where the authenticator does 2 things. It's both doing user verification and proof of possession. And then second factor, where the FIDO authenticator is just doing one job, proof of possession. This is a third use case. This allows a host device, maybe you're on a PC on the web that doesn't have FIDO capabilities, but you have a device in your pocket or on your wrist that does have FIDO capabilities. What CTAP does, it allows you to use that FIDO authenticator on your wrist or in your pocket as your FIDO authenticator and do transactions over that other device, like your PC or tablet. So this has a device-to-device component that we didn't have in FIDO 1 or FIDO 1.1. And it works with the specifications coming out of W3C. And last but not least, as I've talked to more and more enterprises and relying party organizations about FIDO and its level of readiness, and I've asked them, so what, if anything, do you still need to see before you commit to deploying FIDO, FIDO enabling your infrastructure? And what I've heard more than any other one topic is, I just want to know that I can kind of procure one server, fulfill that promise that FIDO talks about, doing one major infrastructure integration, and then have full interoperability across all the modalities of my employees, all the modalities of my customers. That means I want to be able to support essentially UAF and U2F and the new stuff coming out on the web browser all at the same time. I don't want to have to think about and mix and match and worry about that myself. So to answer that, to make this easier for enterprises and relying parties to get what they want out of FIDO, we're going to be working and launching in 2017 a way to have a FIDO server-side implementation pass, I guess the current project name is Universal Server, which means this is a server-side FIDO capability that if you integrate it, will bring along interoperability across UAF, U2F, and the stuff coming out of W3C. So that should make it easier for relying parties to move forward with confidence that they are supporting the full FIDO device-side ecosystem. So in summary, 2017 is going to be a big year because a lot of what I talked about is all going to land in 2017. More adoption through web platform standardization, more adoption on the mobile side, especially in the payments, for payments through CD-CVM support, the new use cases that are enabled by CTAP. I use the phrase here companion device because if you want to see some of that capability in action today, you can look at what Microsoft's already doing, which they call companion device support, and that's basically the use case. We just haven't standardized it yet. And new certification programs. So what I didn't even get to is that we're also launching a security certification program so that relying parties will now know, okay, well, how well is the private key protected from malware on the device? Are they using a trust execution environment? Are they using a secure element? Are they using a TPM, trusted platform module? So we're going to be able to provide that through a new certification program that tests how well the private key is protected. So it's going to be a big year. Thank you for indulging, I think, a couple minutes over. There was a lot to get through. I don't know if we have time for questions.
I think we have time for one question. Any questions for Brett? Or any question for Brett?
Brett, you mentioned a lot about FIDO devices. At the end of the presentation, you made clear that FIDO is not about biometrics, wearables, any method of user verification or such. Can you speak a little bit to the idea of software-based FIDO authenticators?
Yes. So, for example, apps. The way I think about this question of a software authenticator is an app. Can I download something that does FIDO? Can I add FIDO to my app? I'm an app provider. Can I just add FIDO to my app and do FIDO authentication and get away from passwords? Or do I need to be running on a device that has a FIDO hardware capability? You can absolutely just build FIDO into your own app. You can deprecate passwords and start using FIDO with your apps right now. You do not need a device with special hardware capabilities. And there's a lot of software, biometric algorithms that you can kind of plug in. So you can kind of get your biometric from someone over here. You can get your FIDO SDK from someone over there, and just add FIDO capabilities to your apps right now. The only thing you won't have is, I don't want to say government level, but there is a whole security world out there where it's very important, especially to certain regulated industries, that private key has certain protections around it. So you might not have that. Everything else you'll have. And if you're replacing passwords, you're going to have a far more secure authenticator. So don't wait for every device to have a TEE. Don't wait for anything. I mean, the technology has been in the market and implemented since 2014. So it's mature, and you can simply add it to your apps now and be doing yourself and your users a huge favor of getting off of shared secrets. So thank you.
Thanks, Brett.